I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine the Latest. Today, after yet more long-range Ukrainian strikes against Russian targets, we hear that as executions of Ukrainian prisoners of war by Russian troops have allegedly surged this year, a top Kyiv official warns it could indicate a shift in Moscow's policy.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
The first duty of my government is security and defence, to make clear our unshakable support of NATO and with our allies towards Ukraine.
Kyiv stands strong.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Monday, the 7th of October, 2 years and 231 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by senior foreign correspondent Roland Oliphant and foreign reporter Liz Cookman. I started with the latest battlefield updates from Ukraine and Russia. I will shortly start with the updates from the battlefield, but I just want to make a note that you may have noticed a special episode of Ukraine the Latest went out at the weekend, Saturday I think it was. It was one of David's last interviews. He did an interview with the historian, author and podcaster James Roland about the Eastern Front of the Second World War and lessons that can be drawn out for today. I must admit, it took me by surprise. I know it was in the offing. We've talked about it for a while. It's one of a series to come, but I was not expecting it to be out on Saturday. So I was a bit surprised to see that and surprised to hear the old boy's voice again. So I'm sorry if that took you by surprise without so much fanfare from us. It's the normal level of administration here, as you can tell. There will be more in that series as and when we get them all polished and ready to go. And I will try and give you some notice next time. Try and get some notice for myself. But yeah, that's up there. It's a really interesting chat, actually. I mean, James Roland, he's certainly, he knows his onions. I'll leave it at that. So, welcome everybody. I'm going to start, as I say, with a battlefield update. Starting with a report this morning out of Ombre Intelligence, worth following them. They say a St Kitts and Nevis flagged general cargo vessel was hit this morning by a missile in the port of Yuzhny. That's about 20 k's northeast, slightly up the coast from Odessa. In video footage of the attack, likely taken from a Russian reconnaissance drone, they say a direct strike was seen on the vessel. This is not collateral damage. The missile hit amidships. That's exactly where it should go if it's aimed at a ship. No casualties reported that I've seen so far, and we're told a total of 19 merchant vessels were moored in the port at the time of the attack. A Russian Ministry of Defense official confirmed the ship was the target of an Iskander-M missile attack, saying, quote, the ship delivered a batch of ammunition and weapons to the port from Europe. Not so sure about that. I mean, you don't have to go via the Black Sea from Europe to get to Ukraine, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. Elsewhere across the country, Ukrainian air defences shot down 2 Kinjal missiles launched against Kyiv Oblast, along with 32 attack drones across various regions of the country. This comes from Ukraine's Air Force this morning. In total, 80 projectiles, including that Iskander-M ballistic missile, plus a guided Kh-59 and at least one other missile of an unknown type were fired by Russian forces. All the missiles were intercepted. Debris fell in 3 districts of Kyiv, started fires across the city, but no casualties reported there. However, across the country, there were thankfully small numbers of deaths and injuries, including in Kherson, where just a couple of hours ago, around 10:40 a.m. local time this morning, 2 glide bombs were fired into the coastal area of the central district and 2 more in the northern part of the city, 19 injured there. Now, Ukraine conducted long-range strikes against Russian-held Crimea last night. Ukrainian missiles hit the largest oil depot in occupied Crimea. So second only to, well, there's 2 of these types. There's one left in Sevastopol, apparently. A large fire resulted. This comes from the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces this morning. So this is the Feodosia facility that's in the southeast of occupied Crimea, hit at around 0430 local. The Telegram channel Astra later named the facility as the Marine Oil Terminal. Now, that was previously targeted by Ukrainian drones in March of this year. It again highlights, as we've said many times, Russian air defence systems can't cover everywhere all the time, and oil facilities seem not to be priorities, even ones that have been hit just a few months ago. A reason to that, what you will, what their capability is. The Crimean Wind Telegram channel also reported that the airfields in Belbek and Saki were attacked overnight, possibly part of this wave of strikes. That first one, Belbek, is just north of Sevastopol. Saki is about a further 40 k's up the western coast of occupied Crimea. Now then, yesterday also, during an unannounced visit to Kyiv on Sunday, Dutch Defence Minister Ruben Brekelmans said the Netherlands are going to invest, interesting word and correct word, more on that in a moment, invest 400 million euros, 440 million US dollars, in a drone development initiative with Ukraine. Now, this is going to cover reconnaissance and attack drones and basically everything, all types of drones. So Mr. Brekelmans confirmed also while he was in Kyiv, confirmed for the first time that the first Dutch F-16s are in Ukraine. I mean, we've seen images, but we don't know from which country. But he also promised the rest of the 24 the Netherlands pledged will be delivered over the coming months. Now, back to that drone investment. About half the 400 million euros is going to be ploughed into manufacturers in the Netherlands. The remainder split between Ukraine and elsewhere. This reporting comes from Kyiv Independent. And you'll remember that since the start of the full-scale invasion, the Netherlands has committed 10 billion, big B billion euros, about just over 11 billion US dollars in military aid to Ukraine, with 4 already spent. So more of that, please. Going back over the weekend, on Saturday, Ukraine's General Staff said they'd hit 3 Russian command posts with Storm Shadow and GMLRS missiles, GMLRS being the guided multiple launch rocket system. The command posts of the 35th and 27th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigades, as well as one of the command posts of Russia's 2nd Combined Arms Army, were hit. There's video to accompany this announcement by Ukraine, and that was posted out. At least one of the blasts was in Avdiivka. Ukraine's military chiefs didn't specify the exact locations of the strikes or the dates on which they were carried out, only saying that they happened the other day. Sounds like your mate, the other day. Now, last one from me. Reporting today from the Institute for the Study of War, the US-based think tank, they say Russian forces have reportedly lost at least 5 divisions worth of armoured vehicles, including tanks, in the Pokrovsk area and the wider western Donbass since the beginning of their offensive in the area, started with their attempts to seize Avdiivka in October last year. So basically, ISW is citing an OSINT site I've not heard of before, NALSIO 26, NAALSIO 26. So I don't know what that individual is, the team are, but if ISW is citing them, then I'm happy to report it. So they are saying that, well, they're a site that visually tracks, confirms Russian vehicle and equipment losses in Ukraine. They say Russian forces have lost 1,830 pieces of heavy equipment in Pokrovsk over the last year, including 539 tanks, which the ISW say is roughly a division and a half's worth of Russian tanks, according to their doctrine, and also 1,020 infantry fighting vehicles, which ISW say is roughly 4 to 5 mechanised infantry divisions worth of vehicles. Big numbers. ISW say the actual number of Russian vehicle losses in the Pokrovsk area is likely to be higher than reported, given that not all of Russian vehicle losses are visually documented. These ones are only by that site, NALSIO 26. These are visually referenced. I mean, it's just a staggering amount of equipment. And yes, they are pulling out armoured vehicles, including tanks literally from museums. I think we've certainly seen T-62s. I think we've seen T-54s as well somewhere, haven't we? We've seen them bodging the turrets onto other vehicles just to try and keep this going. It's not a limitless supply. It challenges this narrative of Russia's limitless supply of men and material. There's a RUSI report out. RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute think tank here in London, said the Russian war economy's days are numbered. Worth a read. I won't go into it now because I'm trying to get the author on the pod at some point this week. But yeah, that's worth a read as well to go alongside that report. Okay, now then, Rolando, you've been looking at a few things. Today is an anniversary, a number of anniversaries. What have you been looking at, Roland?
Yes, well, I was thinking we'd start the diplomatic political updates in Russia, where it is Vladimir Putin's 72nd birthday. which means, of course, it is also the 18th anniversary of the murder of Anna Politkovskaya, a campaigning Russian journalist who was deeply critical of Putin's violent criminal methods long before many other people, murdered on this day in the stairwell of her apartment building in Moscow early in 2006. I believe. So a number of things to chew on and remember there. Plenty of birthday greetings for Putin within Russia. Of course, Alexander Dugin saying happy birthday to the Tsar. That's what you'd expect from a far-right, quite eccentric philosopher. Ramzan Kadyrov sending his own happy returns of the day to his boss. The Ukrainian government has also sent Vladimir Putin a birthday present by the looks of things. Ukrainian government sources have confirmed or said that it was Ukrainian hackers who were responsible for a large-scale cyber attack on Russian state media company VGTRK. That's the all-Russian state television and radio broadcasting company. It's the kind of holding company in which a lot of Russia's main state television channels are in. CO1, Vesti, all that lot. All of their online broadcasting, so their live streaming if you're watching on the internet, all went down. Dmitry Peskov has confirmed, actually, the Kremlin spokesman has confirmed an unprecedented attack. Specialists are working to determine who was responsible. The Ukrainians have already claimed responsibility. So clearly a bit of a stunt, really. I mean, it's not a stunt with great war-winning potential, but it seems clearly an attempt to poke Putin in the eye and embarrass him on his birthday. Other developments out of Moscow, interestingly. So number one, on a diplomatic front, Russia has said it is going to replace its current ambassador in Washington when he steps down, it's interesting because Anatoly Antonov, who's been there, he's been Russia's man in Washington since 2017. He's 69. In July, he said his term was coming to an end. We don't know when he's going, but that sparked rumors of Russia basically downgrading diplomatic relations with the United States, no longer having a permanent ambassador there because nothing had been said about him being replaced. Peskov says no, there will be a new ambassador in Washington, one to watch. Meanwhile, also in Moscow, a Russian court today has sentenced a 72-year-old American citizen, his name is Stephen James Hubbard, to 6 years and 10 months in prison after convicting him in a closed-door trial for serving as a mercenary for Ukraine. Now, there's a few issues, of course, with that. The first one is the Russian definition of mercenary. So the investigators say Hubbard, a native of Michigan, was paid $1,000 a month to serve in the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Unit in the eastern city of Izum, where he had been living since 2014, which sounds to me like, if they're right, then he was in actual fact an enlisted member of the territorial defense, which is not the same as being a mercenary at all. He's just a foreign-born citizen, but the Russians have this habit. The Russians say he was provided with training weapons, ammunition when he signed up in February 22 and was captured by Russian forces in April. So he's been held by the Russians since April 2022. Now he's been charged with being a mercenary. His own family have cast doubt on that whole thing. They say he's very old, he was unlikely to be fighting, and actually he held quite pro-Russian views, so why on earth would he be fighting on the Ukrainian side? It looks like, if I may editorialize for a second, difficult not to see this as effectively a hostage-taking, similar to the arrest of Evan Gershkovich and others, another US citizen that could potentially be used as an exchange. I have a feeling that over years to come we'll hear more about attempts to free this American citizen, and maybe down the line there will be an exchange that he is involved in. Speaking of American exchanges, Victor Bout, he was called the Merchant of Death, I think. He was a Russian arms dealer, essentially, who was arrested and held by the Americans for many years, then released at an exchange a couple of years ago, I think now. He has denied a report in the Wall Street Journal that he is now once again involved in the arms trade, and he is trying to fence Russian missiles to the Houthis in Yemen. He says that's fake. I would add, for context, one of the theories of escalation in the Middle East and the current war down there is that one of Iran's options, if they don't want to get in a direct shooting war with the Americans, would be not to attack Israel directly, but to arm the Houthis or other proxies, and that also arming the Houthis in order to hit American and other assets elsewhere is one of the options the Russians were considering, short of a nuclear escalation, if America was to, for example, give permission for long-range strike into Russia. So that development is something people have been considering for a long time. Interesting to see Victor Bout's name mentioned there. I'm going to move a little bit further west, out of Russia now, to western Ukraine, where the Slovak Prime Minister, Robert Fico, is meeting Ukrainian Minister Denis Shimal. They're in Uzhhorod, right near the Slovakian and Hungarian borders, so way out in western Ukraine. Now, Fico, of course, is thought of as one of the more sympathetic to Russian leaders in the kind of Viktor Orbanish camp in views of the war. Now, he has already said he is not going to support Ukraine joining NATO. I'll give you the quote. "I'll be clear, we have a cold attitude towards Ukraine's NATO membership. We fully support your path to the EU," he told Mr. Shimal. "Your membership will be important and valuable to us. There will be countries in the EU that want the process of Ukraine's accession to be slower. We won't be among them." Talking about peace, he also said, "We wish you the fastest peace possible and take it seriously. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine must be respected. We understand that." And he said, "You have to have security guarantees." Now, the main thing hanging over this meeting between Ukraine and Slovakia is about energy. So Ukraine imposed sanctions on Lukoil, a Russian oil company which is supplying oil to Slovak oil refineries earlier this year. And the Slovak state-owned gas buyer SPP said this month it was continuing negotiations to secure an extension of gas transit through Ukraine after Kyiv's contract with Gazprom expires at the end of the year. Another thing to remember, the gas pipeline that runs through Russia, from Russia through Ukraine to Europe, is still operating and has operated throughout the war. So that's the main issue there. But obviously those remarks about NATO should be noted. It's not a surprising position from Robert Fico, but bear in mind that security guarantees, and specifically, ideally in the form of NATO membership, is a key part of that victory plan that President Zelensky was trying to sell to Joe Biden last week in Washington. It has to be said, not very successfully, apparently, but it's part of the vision the Ukrainians have for ending the war. So as long as there's that kind of roadblock to that's going to be a problem. And that gives me an opportunity to throw this forward to the end of the week. The thing you want to be looking out for, everybody, or the diplomatic event you should be waiting for. On Saturday, there is going to be another meeting of the Ramstein contact group at the US Ramstein Air Base in Germany. That's where countries who donate weapons to Ukraine get together and say how many more weapons they're going to donate and so on. Mr. Zelensky says he is going to present his victory plan again there to try and get the backing of more allies. He's already told the Brits and the Americans about it. How well that goes, we don't know. However, all this talk about ending the war, which has been on for a while, over the weekend, there's an independent Russian publication called Пояснительная записка, so explanatory notes. They released a report, it's all anonymous, but citing sources close to the Kremlin, basically saying that Putin and the Kremlin have concluded peace talks are pointless and their war aim now is to just straight up destroy Ukrainian statehood and keep on going until they've achieved that. A lot of people would say, well, colour me surprised, when was not that their objective? And lastly, if I may, Dom, it's almost an amusing story, but it's also perhaps alarming. The Sunday Times had a remarkable report late yesterday saying that Russian intelligence had successfully recruited a member of the Irish Parliament. Now, the MP has not been named, but the paper says, citing Irish security forces, that this Irish MP met with a Russian foreign intelligence officer called Sergei Prokopiev, who was working on a diplomatic cover out of the Russian embassy in Dublin between 2019 and 2022. That was, anyone in Ireland or Britain will remember, a time of heightened tensions over Brexit negotiations when you had loyalist paramilitaries threatening to start blowing things up. You had Republican paramilitaries saying, we'll start blowing things up if you see another border appearing between the Republic and the North. A tense time. Apparently this MP agreed to help set up meetings between this Russian intelligence officer and Northern Irish paramilitaries. Prokofiev was apparently expelled from Ireland in March 2022 following the Russian invasion. The Russians apparently then sent a honeypot, quotation, a striking-looking female agent to entangle the politician romantically, thus compromising him further and encouraging him to cooperate. No action was taken because the MP apparently was not breaking any law. He didn't have any access to classified information, wasn't a spy, but was considered by the Russians an agent of influence. That is an easily influenced person who could make introductions, disrupt public discourse, or air the Kremlin's view if and when prompted. So the basic message being this guy was perhaps not even aware he was talking to a Russian intelligence officer, but as far as the Russians were concerned, they had him pretty much where they wanted him to do their bidding in getting their narrative out into the public space, which I think is an instructive bit of reporting to bear in mind about Russian espionage methods, I suppose. That, Dom, is pretty much where we are on the diplomatic and political front as of 13:22 London time today.
Oh, thank you, Roland. Very precise there at the end, not like you. Yeah, I saw that story about the alleged Irish spy. I mean, something doesn't add up here. Why would Russia go to this effort to try and recruit someone or compromise someone that then has no utility to them whatsoever? If this individual was not in a position, unless they see real potential, in 5 years' time, this may be something. They're playing the long game. Something's not quite right there, but maybe we will never know. I also know you mentioned the Ramstein group this Friday. I think that's the one. I think this is this the last one where the Biden has called for it to be national leaders? It's normally at the kind of defence ministers, defence secretary level and their chiefs of defence. But he's called for one more before he leaves office to be at national leader level. I think that might be this one if President Zelensky is going to be reintroducing his peace plan, or the victory plan. I wonder if that's this Friday that national leaders will be gathering. We'll keep an eye out. Now, great pleasure to introduce for the first time to the pod Liz Cookman. Liz, you've written quite a few bits and bobs for the Telegraph on the foreign desk, but a couple caught my eye over the weekend. It's firstly the odd story about that Russian experimental drone, this massive drone that seems to have gone a bit rogue, and Russia. It looks like they shot it down themselves rather than it fall into Western hands, which it still managed to do. But then this very, very alarming story that you've written, quoting Kyiv officials, the prosecutor general, executions of Ukrainian prisoners of war by Putin's forces. I mean, we know it's going on. We've reported it before, but you said, you're quoting the prosecutor general, saying the numbers have surged this year, and the prosecutor general saying that could indicate a shift in Russian policy. I mean, all very, very grim stuff, really, really despicable stuff. Can you talk us through your story, please, and try and give us some idea of how much weight we should put on? I mean, I think it's beyond doubt that this is happening. It's been widely reported, including by the UN. That how much weight should we put on this suggestion that it's surged this year, and also that it's now Russian policy? Liz, very warm welcome to the pod.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, so it's quite a harrowing set of stories that actually have come out last week if you're the family member or related to a prisoner of war, because not only has there been this surge in executions of prisoners of war, there was also news from the Defence Ministry that 177 people have died so far in Russian captivity. And also a UN report came out warning of torture and other ill treatment in captivity. So there's three big indicators that it's very bad for Ukrainian prisoners of war, which I think we knew already, but it's always good to have evidence. But yeah, this surge in prisoner executions. So Yuri Belousov, who is the head of the Prosecutor General's office, said this on Ukrainian TV last week on Friday. And he also spoke in a documentary by a Ukrainian investigative journalism outlet on this topic. And basically, the uptick started in November last year and has particularly surged. He himself put it down to a new Russian policy because these cases have been recorded in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kharkiv, Kherson. So there's no obvious pattern. There's no one area. There's no one unit that's doing this. It seems to be across the board. So that suggests that it's policy rather than accidental or isolated cases. But so far, there's no evidence given for that. It could also be perhaps that more cases have just been recorded this year, because it seems that a lot of these cases are getting recorded through videos that have been shared by Russian war bloggers or Telegram accounts. And these videos are usually very gruesome, and they get shared quite widely. I mean, there was one last week where a man, he's shirtless, he's wearing just shorts, and he's kneeling in a grave, being pushed around by somebody wearing a Russian military uniform with Wagner patches, and then a knife is pointed at his throat, and he's forced to say, "Thank you, Uncle Zhenya Prigozhin, for raising such guys." And then in a second clip that also circulated, it seems to be the same guy shown from the back in a field. The people filming declare that they've sentenced him to death, and then they shoot the guy. So there's a lot of these kind of videos. There was also one quite well known from a few weeks ago. It was a photo actually where there is a Ukrainian soldier lying on the floor who has a sword coming out of him that says "For Kursk" written down the blade. And there are also ones circulating of Ukrainian soldiers who have surrendered and are then killed. So Russians are circulating the evidence of their own war crimes, and so that's how these are getting recorded.
I mean, it's just extraordinary that they... I mean, you've been to the country many more times than me. Why do they record themselves. So they have absolutely no fear of any sort of future process of justice. They just not think this is worth people's attention. What on earth do you think is motivating people to actually document their war crimes?
Well, yeah, I've been living in Ukraine pretty much the whole war since just before the war. I think there's a mass dehumanization of each side, which I think takes place in any war, but it's particularly pronounced here, and that leads to a kind of bloodlust where people are desperate for this sort of content. I mean, you just have to scroll through Twitter to see hundreds of videos of drones dropping grenades on soldiers from both sides. And in total, it's been quite a gruesome war for social media content.
It certainly has. And just finally on this bit, I mean, it is correct to record these events for humanity. And I remember the years of the conflicts in the Balkans where people thought there was never going to be any process of justice. But Ratko Mladic and Milosevic were brought to trial there by the ICC. But I mean, realistically, when you were living in Ukraine, what is the mood? How powerful is the prosecutor general, and how much effort does the state give the office? Does the central authorities in Kyiv really lean into this because they expect a future process of justice, or are they just doing what they can and going through the motions?
Well, I think it's the first time in history that war crimes or evidence of war crimes have been recorded in real time. Some of these executions have been caught on camera by drones. For example, there's a unit who are investigating sexual crimes in Bucha in the Kyiv region, and they brought about prosecutions of Russian soldiers, some of whom are actually already dead, unfortunately, so the survivors won't get any justice. But they recorded hundreds of thousands of possible war crimes, and they're taking it very seriously. I think the US Justice Department has also brought its first ever case of war crimes in its 30-year history for Russia's war crimes, and obviously the ICC has a criminal case out against Putin, and there are also various UK lawyers, and I think Amal Clooney is also working on war crimes. So it's a huge concerted effort, and I think the role that the Ukrainian authorities are playing is they're really collecting all that evidence. They've got police, they've got people from the General Prosecutor's Office, and so there's just a huge body of stuff for people to sift through. But whether that's going to go anywhere anytime soon, I don't know. I mean, there's talk of a special tribunal for Putin, and some people have suggested it could happen in absentia, but that's really all still to be seen.
Thanks, Liz. Roland here. I was just wondering, you've touched on it already, talking about the kind of mass dehumanization. But I'm wondering whether you think that maybe one possible explanation for this apparent surge in executions of prisoners, maybe it is an order, maybe it is policy, but could it also simply be a product of 2.5 years of really violent war and a general collapse of basic ethics, basic moral compass? A sense that the war has just reached a point at the front where all kind of rules or restraint have gone out of the window.
Yeah, absolutely. And my understanding is Russia's push forward in Donetsk at the moment is particularly aggressive, particularly brutal. The civilian casualties have surged over the summer to, I think, some of their highest death rates since the first months of the war. And yeah, I think that's absolutely possible. I did an investigation for The Telegraph earlier in the year about life in occupied Ukraine. And people were very oppressed. There was very little freedom. People were being forced to take Russian passports, or they weren't able to do anything. And also Russian troops and Russian people were being moved into areas across the occupied areas like Mariupol, Melitopol and stuff. But the interesting thing is that from what people told me, the Russians that were moving in were also not happy with the situation. And so I think there's like extreme war fatigue, not just from Russian forces, but Russian people in occupied areas. And when fatigue sets in and a lack of resources, of course, any kind of respect for morals or international human law is going to lapse.
Thanks, Liz. And thanks for your question there, Roland. Liz, before you dash off, could you just quickly cover the other story that you did about this drone, this huge Russian drone that's thought to be one of only 2 prototypes that was brought down? All the reporting I've seen was that Russia shot it down themselves. So I wonder if you know any more about that. But if so, I think it's extraordinary that, and again, it comes back to that point that I mentioned earlier on about the Russian limited material that's left. If they are trialling prototypes directly in a war in the front line, in a war setting, in the operational setting. I mean, that speaks of how under pressure their defence industrial base is. I mean, yes, you'll always shortcut these things. You put it through a much shorter testing process, but to push it straight out, if it's still so clunky that it might just go a little bit mad and keep heading west, I think speaks very poorly of it shows how little resilience there is in Russia's defence system. But I might be building an argument on a house of cards. Liz, you looked at the story. Was that about your take from it?
Well, military experts have suggested that this drone, which is a Hunter S-70 drone, was possibly being used for reconnaissance. I think people are still trying to figure out why Russia would use such a valuable piece of new technology in such a risky area, because it was downed over Konstantinivka and it's quite close to the front line, so there's quite a lot of heavy fighting there. So this drone has been under development since 2009, and it was supposed to go into mass production later this year because it passed state testing last year. But they're still quite rare. Russia's state news agency TASS said in 2020 that one of the drones had been insured for loss and damage for $18 million. So they're really quite pricey. So it's not. I mean, it was originally reported that Ukraine had downed an Su-24 fighter jet, but later it emerged from videos that it was quite clearly not a jet from the videos. And then people started to piece together from the photos of the wreckage that it was this kind of drone. Ukraine is still investigating the wreckage and they're going to come out with something more official eventually, but it comes amid heavy drone attacks on Ukraine. I think every single night in September there were drone attacks, and I think so far pretty much the same in October. And the former spokesperson for the Air Force has warned that this is likely to be how things are now. Expect unidentified drones, new types of drones. And he warned that Ukraine is not going to know what they are till they down them and are able to analyse them and look through the wreckage. So there's some speculation from military experts that, the drone was downed by Russia itself. It seemed to be shot down from a plane rather than from some kind of ground-mounted anti-Air Force gun. And the speculation is that Russia downed it themselves so that there would be more damage, so that the Ukrainian forces could figure out less from the wreckage. But as I said, more to come on that.
Definitely one to watch. I like the line, as you say, they've said it's supposed to go into mass production later this year. Undoubtedly at the same time as the T-14 Armata tank goes into mass production, but then they've been saying that for about a decade now. Coming up, we hear final thoughts from the team. So let's start wrapping up. Let's have a look at final thoughts. Roland, do you want to go first for final thoughts, please?
Oh, thank you. Just while we've been up, I've just noticed Sergei Naryshkin, the head of the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, has just been at a security conference accusing the United States and Britain of blowing up Nord Stream. Interestingly, saying that he believes the Americans have markedly increased satellite reconnaissance of Russia's border areas, and that the Ukrainians intend to capture and hold hostage the Kursk atomic nuclear power station with the help of NATO special forces. So nothing to actually rely on there, but he's popping up, giving his usual kind of funny speeches. But really the thing I wanted to draw your attention to, everybody, missing from the diplomatic updates earlier, is that this is also a month of elections in the kind of post-Soviet periphery. We're going to see an election in Georgia later this month and in Moldova. They're both elections where we think that the Russians are going to try and swing things their way. They're considered kind of battle line states by the Russians and the West, if you like. And today, Georgian Dream, the ruling pro-Russian Georgian party, have said they want to impeach the pro-Western president of that country before the election. They probably don't have enough seats to succeed in that until after the parliamentary vote, but they've said they want to do it. And Mr. Naryshkin, who I just mentioned, said before the weekend that he is confident the Georgian people will make the right choice, which I think should raise a few eyebrows. So those are two other developments this month that are likely to be worth keeping your eye on.
Thanks, Roland. We certainly will. We had Katya Shinelia, formerly of Moscow Times, a Georgian, or dual national Georgian, with us last week. She's going to keep an eye on that for us. We're going to speak to her later in the month. And I notice your subliminal plug for battle lines in your final thoughts there, Roland. Can't get that one past me too easily. Liz, first time on the pod. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us as our guest today. Would you like the final thoughts?
So my final thought is not so much about defence, it's more about the social kind of side of stuff. I was just reading that there is an app in Ukraine that people can use for all their social services, like government body stuff. And they've just introduced a way that you can get married. So you can get married on the app. You don't have to be in the same place. You can be, say, in Kyiv, and the guy that you're marrying can be on the front line. And you basically have a few-minute video sermon, and then you both sign digitally and you get married, which I thought was super interesting because it comes amid rising divorce rates in Ukraine. There's also obviously the strain of being apart for several years has damaged a lot of relationships a lot. And also Ukraine had the lowest birth rate in Europe, I think possibly one of the lowest in the world before the war. And now it's even worse. So I think it's quite interesting. And also, I personally actually got married in Ukraine earlier this year because it was so much easier than anywhere else. And now it's even easier.
That's fascinating. We'd have to keep an eye on that story. Wow, married by kind of puts the Las Vegas drive-through, kicks into a cocked hat. Brilliant. Liz, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for including your cat as well. Good luck. Don't go on holiday to Springfield. But yes, thank you for your moggy. Thanks for joining us today. Roland, thank you for your input as well. But thanks everyone for dialing in today. Thanks, Roland, again. Thanks, Liz. And we'll see you same time, same place tomorrow. From the Telegraph here in London, I wish you all a very good afternoon. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from the Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and to stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our foreign affairs newsletter, bringing stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload. So if you want to hear Ukraine the Latest as soon as it's released, do refer to podcast apps. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on Twitter. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you are listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.